Good day, everyone. Welcome to Enhancing the Resilience of Infrastructure presentation for the 7th Regional Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction in the Americas and the Caribbean. Our lead organizations today are the Pan American Health Organization, the World Health Organization, and co-lead of the Organization for the United Nations Office for Project Services, and our contributing agency of the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. I'm Dawn Skaggs, the Emergency, Disaster, and Climate Resilience Specialist at the World Institute on Disability in the Disability Inclusive Emergency Preparedness, Disaster Risk Reduction, and Humanitarian Action, Climate Justice, Sustainability, and Community Resilience Domain Department, and I'll be your moderator today. We have a terrific session that is intended to be interactive with questions and answers using the interactive platform Slido. We have 4 goals today. The first one is to document the actions implemented in the countries of the region for the design, contracting, construction, and operation of national resilient infrastructures with a priority focus on environmental sustainability. Our second goal is to identify best practices for public and private investments in building resilient infrastructure, including national health systems. The third goal is to provide ideas, recommendations, tools, practical examples, and real references on how to enhance the resilience of infrastructure. And finally, our fourth goal is to promote the incorporation of disaster risk assessments in the development and implementation of territorial policies for the design, contracting, construction, and operation of resilient infrastructure, as well as the use of guidelines and monitoring tools based on expected demographic and environmental changes. Our keynote speaker today is Professor Liz Varga, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to her. She is a professor of complex systems at the Universidad de Londres. Liz Varga joined the University College in London in 2019 and is developing an Institute for Infrastructure Systems. Dr. Varga, I'm going to turn it over to you now to share a little bit about yourself and then move into your session.
Okay, so thank you very much, Dawn. It's my pleasure to be here to present this keynote talk on enhancing the resilience of infrastructure. We've been developing some principles with the UNDRR, United Nations Disaster Risk Reduction Department, and these are very, very important for taking the agenda forward. So if I can go straight into my presentation. Okay, so in terms of the need for resilient infrastructure has never been so high. We know that without resilient infrastructure, that society will perform suboptimally, both in terms of social outcomes and economic outcomes, but also with risk to environmental harm. We also see a convergence of a number of challenges to resilient infrastructure. And these include the growing interconnectedness of the world, sometimes called globalization, but at all scales. We also see rising risks of disasters brought on by the climate resilience emergency, which is leading to more significant, more frequent, more intense natural disasters that we can now more accurately predict than before. We also see that there's a need to multiply the capacity of infrastructure provision, especially in developing countries. We see that this is likely to double or more in the next 10 years. We also see that we have many goals for decarbonisation, for mitigating emissions that are undesirable. So all these agendas are converging. They're coming together to make this a massive priority now to enhance the resilience of infrastructure. So the scope of resilient infrastructure. So infrastructure is the energy, the transport, the water, the waste, and the telecommunications systems that we have, but also embraces aspects of social infrastructures such as hospitals and fire and emergency services. But what we're doing here is building on work from United Nations, so building on their definition of resilient infrastructure, by work that we've done with literature review, by looking at academic papers, but also through engagement with national level organisations in the UK. We're extending the definition of resilient infrastructure to embrace the whole life cycle of infrastructure. So not just the investment into new projects, but also the importance of maintenance and the end of life of infrastructure as well. We also recognise in our definition that the capacity of each nation will be different. They will have a different level of tolerance to the amount of critical services that they will allow to be interrupted. Some nations will aim to have no outages at all, so critical services continue entirely, but other nations might not be able to achieve that goal immediately. So there will be a potential for a tolerance for reduced levels of critical services. Now, the way that we see these principles being implemented is really important. We expect to see geopolitical leadership so that the principles that I'm going to describe will be embraced by a nation or large territory or region. By embracing these principles, they will become standards or regulation or guidance. These guidances will inform any form of infrastructure updates, any investments into new infrastructure, so that when the infrastructure update or investment has been made, we can immediately say that the resilience of the whole nation has now increased. This idea of net resilience gain. So we are building on increasing the resilience in a continuous way for both the legacy and for new systems. Now, when these infrastructures are now resilient ready, we should see a reduction, a short-term reduction in the amount of disruptions, because the infrastructure will be more able to withstand and to also recover from interruptions which do attack. Of course, the long-term benefits are far more important, because what we will see is that there will be less harm, less loss of life, and actually greater investor confidence because of the reliability of critical services. So we see really positive outcomes from investing in resilience. Okay, so the last slide before quickly go to the principles. We no longer can argue that the economics of investment into resilience are enough. We know that there are plenty of evidences that show that economic investment works. So here we have an example from Bangladesh, where they increased investment into the making their infrastructure climate resilient. Their cost was 560 million, yet they can predict that they will save up to 3 times that figure, 1.6 billion, by making that initial investment. We see in Hurricane Sandy in New York that when they had the economics of the telecoms infrastructure there, they didn't replace like for like, so they adapted and transformed going forward. And they knew that these fiber optic cables they were investing in would be much more resilient to water damage, on the expectation that there would be more water damage. So the economics is no longer an argument for not investing. We can have plenty of evidence to show that it is an economically sound investment. Okay, so the spaces principles that I would like to invest here, we use spaces because they are the first the first character of each of the 6 principles. So it's an easy way to remember the principles. The 6 principles are therefore spaces. They're shared for spaces. We have shared, we have protected by design, we have adaptively transforming, we have continuously learning, environmentally compatible, and socially engaged. Now, all these principles together will give us resilient infrastructure. We don't propose to pick 1 or 2 of these. You need all of them to make the whole system be more resilient. Now, for the first one, I just want to show you shared. The goal here is to share information and expertise so that we have coordinated benefits. Now, the coordination can be between institutes, between government, between supply chain players, but also with the community. And in fact, the example I want to show here is the Peru Rural Roads Programme, where they had community participation to deliver large-scale benefits with rural transport, local economic development, and local governance. So the players were engaged and participating actively in the coordination efforts. On the second principle, protected by design, the idea is to design infrastructure that is already prepared for hazards, and there is plenty of evidence of hazards forthcoming. The example I'm going to show here is on composites. So the investment in Atlanta, Georgia, was for an existing bridge where they replaced heavy concrete bridge infrastructure with durable, corrosion-resistant composites, being ready for climate change attacks. So we know already the bridge will now survive in a more long-term way. The next principle is on adaptively transforming. And here the goal is to survive chronic and acute change through adaptive transformation. Now, this could be small adaptation or it could be large scale change. I will show you here the small scale change. Now it is the Assini-Boyne River in Winnipeg is a dike. So basically it holds back water, but what they've done is enabled the dike to be breached. So a planned breach, a deliberate breach to slow down massive floodwaters that if the breach was not created, it would cause massive flooding, affecting hundreds of homes and a massive area downstream. So here we have the opportunity by adapting to transform what is a barrier into something that be a controlled release of water for safety purposes. So the fourth principle is continuously learning. And the importance here is to have a continuous way to understand and get insight into infrastructure resilience. And the example I'm going to pick here is in Morocco, where they have been modeling natural hazards for their coral reef systems. Now, the coral reefs already provide a barrier for flooding and for erosion. And what they've done is modeled the importance of the longevity of the coral reefs. So, and they can now be reassured that their investment into the protection for the nature-based solution will be good for infrastructure resilience. The fifth principle, just two more slides. The fifth principle is on environmentally compatible. So here we have the goal to look in a positively, to work with a positive compatibility with the environment. We have many examples of green infrastructure already, and you see here green roofs. We have well-anchored vegetation to avoid landslides. We can also see that if we don't look after the natural solutions like forests, that they can also create soil erosion and more flooding. So, but we have to also take care with working with the environment. So we mustn't allow attacks on the grey infrastructure through so not looking after the natural vegetation. We must maintain the natural vegetation. So it is a useful barrier for grey infrastructure as well. Okay, and my last slide, which is on socially engaged, and the goal here is to develop active engagement with the community. Now, this is different from the first principle of shared. This socially engaged is about demand side response. How do we engage the community to either keep their infrastructure in working order or to reduce their demand? Now, the example here I want to use is in Zambia, where there was high vandalism. And what they did was actually get the community to have a sense of ownership for the infrastructure by making them make a contribution, financial contribution. Now, what that did was create, if you like, the community force that meant that the vandalism was significantly reduced. And of course, without vandalism, you then have a more provision of critical services, which is our aim. So that's the end of my six principles. I highly commend them to everyone, and we want to engage with people to make these better and improve them so that we can actually adopt these globally. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Varga. We appreciate your insights and wisdom in this timely and important area. You brought forward the importance of building on existing work, the symbiosis of multiple infrastructure resilience components, as well as strategically investing in resilience. The 6 principles of resilient infrastructures and their systemic impact was incredibly useful as we collaboratively move toward bolstering infrastructure resilience. We appreciate your time. We're going to move now into the panel session of our presentation, where we'll hear from Mr. Alejandro Rossi, Mr. Fabio Lopez Chacon, and Dr. the Honorable Christopher Tufton. Each speaker will introduce themselves, and this will be followed by 3 rounds of questions and answer opportunity, where we'll hear from each of our panelists and our keynote. If you have questions for our panelists, please provide these in Slido, and we will try to answer them within our time frame today as time allows. And we'll begin this section with Mr. Alejandro Rossi. Mr. Rossi is the Multi-County Director of Costa Rica, Panama, and the Caribbean for UNOPS. Mr. Rossi.
Muy buenas tardes. Muchas gracias, Don, por la introducción y también por la excelente presentación de Liz Varga. Desde la Oficina de las Naciones Unidas de Servicios para Proyectos, UNOPS, tenemos el mandato de las Naciones Unidas para implementar proyectos de infraestructura. Actualmente somos conscientes que la situación del cambio climático y por el otro lado de la cada vez más fuertes eventos de riesgos de desastres nos obliga a tener una infraestructura cada vez mejor preparada en la región de América Latina y el Caribe. De manera que muy interesados en participar de esta sesión y poder reflexionar sobre algunos de los puntos mencionados por Liz durante su presentación. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Mr. Rossi. Our next speaker who will be introducing themselves is Mr. Fabio Lopez Chacon. Mr. Lopez is the mayor of Cubano Town in Costa Rica. Welcome, sir, and I turn the presentation over to you to introduce yourself.
Sí, hola, buenas tardes. Para mí es un honor y un gusto estar con ustedes la tarde de hoy para poder exponer un poco de la experiencia que tenemos nosotros desde un municipio alejado de la zona más central del país de Costa Rica, una zona pues, que es hermosa y cuenta con una zona costera muy amplia que nos enfrenta a grandes desafíos en materia de desastres ambientales y esperamos poder proyectar esto y también proyectar las posibles soluciones que como municipalidad estamos intentando desarrollar para nuestra región. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Mr. Lopez. We are going to move forward into the first question and answer round, and we will an introduction from Dr. Tufton when he arrives, and we will begin this question and answer round 1 with a question for Mr. Rossi. UNOPS recently released a report on infrastructure for climate action. How do your findings relate to the disaster risk strategy?
Muchas gracias, Don, y voy a responder. El informe presentado el pasado 12 de octubre por el Programa de las Naciones Unidas para el Medio Ambiente, por la propia UNOPS y la Universidad de Oxford, titulado Infraestructura para la Acción Climática, destaca el potencial determinante que tiene la infraestructura para alcanzar el horizonte de sostenibilidad que define la Agenda 2030, así como las metas establecidas en el Acuerdo de París en materia de mitigación y adaptación al cambio climático. El conjunto de los distintos sectores que integran las inversiones de infraestructura contribuyen con el 79% de las emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero y contribuyen con un 88% de todos los costos de adaptación al cambio climático, incluyendo los costos asociados a mejorar la resiliencia de la infraestructura que forma parte de los esfuerzos de adaptación. Adicionalmente, el informe destaca que los países de ingresos medianos y bajos podrían beneficiarse con una ganancia de hasta $4 por cada $1 invertido en infraestructura que priorice la resiliencia con miras al futuro. Por ese motivo, el informe presentado por UNOPS hace foco en la necesidad de un desarrollo compatible con el clima. Desarrollo compatible con el clima es el desarrollo que minimiza el desarrollo causado por los efectos del clima y maximiza las numerosas oportunidades de desarrollo humano que presenta un futuro con bajas emisiones y más resiliente. De esa manera, los objetivos del Acuerdo de París en materia de mitigación y adaptación se potencian con los objetivos de sostenibilidad de la Agenda 2030 a través de sus 17 dimensiones. De acuerdo al reciente informe presentado por UNOPS, la infraestructura alberga un inmenso potencial para impulsar el desarrollo compatible con el clima por medio de inversiones que permitan mitigar las emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero y al mismo tiempo nos ayuden a adaptarnos a los efectos del cambio climático. Para finalizar, es muy importante tener presente que las decisiones que se tomen hoy sobre infraestructura impactarán a las generaciones venideras porque están diseñadas para durar. Tenemos una oportunidad única para tomar las decisiones correctas, para asegurar un futuro más sustentable, resiliente e inclusivo para todos y todas. Muchas gracias.
I have a question for Dr. Varga as a follow-up for your keynote. In your keynote, you outlined the 6 principles. What have you found are the most challenging principles to implement for countries or municipalities who are attempting to follow this strategy?
Thank you for the question. We've just set out these principles based on, as I said, the literature review and engagement with the UK. I think what we want to learn is how we can make the principles relevant across the globe in developing countries as well as developed countries. So I think the challenges will be context dependent. So it will depend on the progress towards resilience in each nation state or in each territory. It will also depend on the appetite for resilience and also the effect that the regulations or standards or even guidance can have to come into life as soon as possible. So for me, these challenges are converging so rapidly that if we don't make progress urgently, then we are going to miss the opportunity to make resilient infrastructure. And the fixes we will need to do will be much greater in even 5 years' time. So we must, I think, take action sooner than later. So I think the challenges will be how quickly we can motivate this work to proceed.
How can the UNOPS support countries to have better infrastructure in the face of climate change and disasters?
Muchas gracias. Sabemos hoy que no podemos hablar de infraestructura sin considerar los riesgos de desastres. Y de la misma manera, no podemos hablar de reducir el riesgo de desastres sin considerar a la infraestructura como un factor determinante. Esto significa considerar no solamente las soluciones relacionadas con la construcción de infraestructura, sino también las denominadas soluciones basadas en la naturaleza. Así, por ejemplo, el efecto regulador de los humedales frente a las crecidas de ríos y mares, o bien el potencial de ampliar la superficie de bosques para mantener altos niveles de humedad y reducir el riesgo de sequías e incendios. Y UNOPS, como brazo ejecutor de las Naciones Unidas en materia de infraestructura, cuenta con el mandato y la preparación para asistir a gobiernos y organismos internacionales a movilizar recursos con agilidad y eficacia. En particular, nos vamos a referir a 6 dimensiones de esa posible colaboración. En primer lugar, lo que llamamos soluciones de asistencia técnica con enfoque estratégico, para comprender las conexiones entre clima, riesgo de desastres, manejo de datos y planificación basada en evidencia, con el propósito de alcanzar una planificación integral compatible con el clima. En segundo lugar, las soluciones de diseño y construcción para asegurar un acompañamiento a los gobiernos y entidades durante todo el ciclo de vida de los proyectos, la planificación, los estudios previos, la ejecución y la entrega de una obra terminada específica. En tercer lugar, las soluciones de procurement, a fin de contribuir a que los mercados de oferta y demanda de servicios asociados a la infraestructura compatible con el clima respondan de manera gradual pero efectiva a los nuevos desafíos, asegurar oportunidades para la industria nacional. En cuarto lugar, lo que llamamos soluciones multiescala, considerando niveles nacionales, pero también municipales, porque sabemos que la escala municipal padece una enorme presión como consecuencia de administrar el territorio y responder a los problemas y a las preocupaciones de la gente. Sin embargo, muchas veces el nivel municipal carece de los recursos necesarios para responder a la magnitud de los nuevos desafíos, incluyendo la respuesta a los desastres. En quinto lugar, lo que nosotros llamamos las soluciones multiactor, considerando que los nuevos proyectos requieren una articulación mucho más sofisticada entre actores gubernamentales, nacionales y subnacionales, actores financieros, organizaciones no gubernamentales, sector privado y sociedad civil en toda su diversidad. Y por último, las soluciones de movilización de recursos, con el propósito de asegurar que el potencial interés de los donantes pueda convertirse rápidamente en planes de acción destinados a poner en marcha una nueva generación de proyectos como recientemente el Energy Transition Partnership en el sudeste asiático, beneficiando a Filipinas, Indonesia y Vietnam, implementado por UNOPS. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rossi. Very wonderful to hear about the impact on different locations within this region. We have a second round question for Dr. Varga. You emphasized in your presentation the importance of investment in infrastructure resilience. Can you expand upon what your research found with respect to possible infrastructure investment resistance and how this possible resistance was addressed to achieve engagement and investment of financial, political, and human capital?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, so we found plenty of evidence that investment into resilience is now viable because we can quantify the avoidable cost of not investing. So that we have, for example, we can spend money making seismic strengthening investment that can actually lead to something like 5 or 6 times the reduced cost if we were trying to replace damaged infrastructure assets from seismic disruptions. So we can quantify these economic investments. Now, there are lots of other examples. Already the return on investment is described by the OECD. They talk about how every single dollar spent on the maintenance of infrastructure is the equivalent of 1.5 $1.50 for investment. So we can keep our infrastructures actually in service for longer. So we can, if we do planned maintenance, we avoid infrastructure becoming unusable. We can also make really good returns. So there are also good arguments for not always building new, that we can actually do, rehabilitation, we can do strengthening, that this will actually keep the infrastructures in place for longer. And of course, it means that we also avoid environmental impact through not extracting new resources. So we can avoid excavation, processing, transportation, all the activities that can also lead to very harmful and possibly harmful effects, but also challenge the resilience of the supply chain. So if we're shipping materials from different global locations, we can't always guarantee that we can have a resilient project. So if we can use local materials to rehabilitate, it can be a good avoidance strategy for building new, where we have to take materials from faraway places. Did that answer your question fully, Dawn, or would you like me to elaborate on anything further?
Yes, it did. Thank you very much, Liz.
Thank you.
There may be some questions from our participants as follow-up, and I would like to let everyone know, as a reminder, we will be accepting questions as you have them, if you have them. At this point in time, I'd like to introduce our third panelist. It is Dr. the Honorable Christopher Tufton, who is the Minister of Health and Wellness in Jamaica. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Tufton. And I would invite you to introduce yourself. And I believe that you have a short presentation to share with us today also.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Let me first of all apologize for being late. Unfortunately, called away to an emergency, which I had to deal with. First of all, in interest of time, let me recognize all who are online without naming names. Really happy to be here on this very important discussion around building resilient economies in the Americas and looking at how we manage disaster risk management. What have we learned from the pandemic? Just to be brief, in Jamaica clearly has had the similar challenges to the rest of the world, but as a small island state, our challenges have been more in keeping with that subgroup of smaller countries that are limited in terms of capacity in many areas, and in a sense have to rely on larger, more industrialized, developed countries to respond to some of the needs that we have. For example, access to vaccines. In the initial stages, however, one of the benefits we've had is that we did have a plan, and that's a recommendation I would make. We know what we are vulnerable in terms of general vulnerabilities as small countries in the Caribbean region, for example, and what the health consequences of those vulnerabilities are likely to lead to. So whether it is a hurricane, or it is drought, or in this instance, a pandemic of the likes of COVID-19, you can, in a sense, anticipate even where you are in the world and what the trends are. And so we fortunately benefited from the framework of a disaster risk management plan. And so when COVID started to show its head back in November, December of 2 years ago, we were able to begin to look at that plan and contextualize the plan, which gave us a head start in taking some early decisions. If you have a plan, you can at least contextualize and work towards it. If you don't, then you start from scratch and you're at a major vulnerable position. The second is the issue of partnership. You cannot survive in the context of a disaster, particularly a regional disaster, indeed a national disaster or a global disaster, without coming together. There are so many lessons from the COVID experience, which I think the world needs to sharpen up on and use to move forward. The issue of access to personnel. I must say, in our case, we had to send and receive some 200 healthcare workers to bolster our local capacity from Cuba, our neighbor, who has a significant additional capacity in healthcare training. So they're nurses. We lose a lot of our healthcare workers to the developed world. And so we were able to benefit from that as an example. We were able to benefit from PAHO and the WHO in terms of getting critical support and advice around areas that require additional expertise in one form or another. And that partnership, to my mind, needs to be strengthened coming out of this COVID experience as part of building resilience. And then, of course, in the interest of partnership and building resilience, it's so important for us to recognize and to help others to recognize, meaning the larger developed, more industrialized countries, that we have to partner, because you can't have half of the world being safe and the other half not being safe. Variant strains, for example, in the COVID experience have emerged because there is great inequity in the distribution of vaccines, where some countries stockpile enough multiple times their population, other countries don't have access. Or indeed, when they give or give access, the expiration dates around some of those vaccines are so close, it becomes difficult for the local capacity to administer those vaccines. So I do believe that we need to rethink and relook at that in terms of a general global coordination. And I think WHO/PAHO as the hemispheric body has some ways to go in terms of just looking at those lessons and benefiting from those lessons. And the larger countries should try to provide leadership in that regard. The final point I'd make is, how do we benefit from managing our risk and institutionalizing the response for the future to avoid some of the pitfalls of disasters that we have not seen in a long time. In this instance, a 1 in a 100-year experience. Public health should be stronger for the COVID experience. It means taking a look at how we build capacity, taking a look at how we build infrastructure, how we build testing capacity, for example, taking a look at how we bring in the private sector as part of any plan, because the public sector alone cannot do it, and how we integrate the risk management function in a way that truly gives us greater resilience to deal with a response in an efficient and timely manner. So I believe that Jamaica has benefited by looking at all these experiences. I believe a discussion of this kind is useful because it means we are thinking on how to build that capacity. And I believe it can only be done through the partnerships, including private sector, bilateral, multilateral arrangements, and of course, in country, where a plan that is determined on and then tweaked is in place so that we can adjust as we go along. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. That's an abbreviated presentation because of my accepting the fault of being late. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Tufton. We are glad to have you join us, and enriching to hear what is happening in Jamaica. I'd like to continue with our question and answer rounds and return to Mr. Lopez. Can you hear me, sir?
Mr. Lopez.
Can you maybe turn your mic on?
Cannot hear.
I don't think we can hear you yet. So I'm going to ask Dr. Tufton one of our follow-up questions, and then I will return to you, Mr. Lopez, to see if we can benefit from your time here with us today. Dr. Tufton, in our first round of questions, your question today is, what have we learned from the COVID pandemic regarding the resilience gap specific to infrastructure and services? And I know you touched on this a little in your presentation, but is there anything that you think would be another takeaway learning specific to the infrastructure?
Sure, thank you very much. Well, I think the partnership around build out is important. The truth is you never really have the capacity to deal with outlier events, and disasters normally provide an outlier event. So if you have 5,000 beds in a small country like ours and a disaster of COVID emerges, then clearly it means you may need to increase your bed capacity by another 1,000 or 1,500. To have had 6.5 may have been excess capacity, which you have to keep for a very long period of time. And that does not drive the efficiencies that optimize the efficiencies you want. So it's a matter of how do you build up quickly. And I think one of the lessons we've learned from COVID is how do you take a plan that you have and reserve capacity, build out is structured within that plan to bring in the forces of the private, the public, the bilateral, the multilateral, so that you can improve or increase the capacity to deal with that as quickly as possible. Now, to do that, that plan has to establish a protocol for action because, one of my lessons personally as minister that has been reinforced is that managing through normal times is very different from managing crises. And not everyone who may be an excellent manager in normal times can cope with the managing of crisis. First of all, you have to stabilize the thought process. You have to reduce panic. You have to provide information. One of the things that I think the Jamaica hopefully would have learned from this, and I believe the world needs to too, is the extent to which in crisis you provide information, as much of it as possible, because COVID has really been undermined, or the response, by misinformation. The social media has really, to my mind, demonstrated its capacity for destructive forces to dominate, and issues of anti-vax, issues around whether COVID exists or not, where it exists, has created so much distraction. And so one of the things that we've learned is how do we establish norms that both build capacity, but carries information to facilitate understanding, and hopefully through understanding we'll get take-up. So I'll mention those two for now, Madam Chair, as key lessons that I think we've learned from the experience.
Thank you very much. I'm going to try again to take advantage of the presence of Fabio Lopez from Costa Rica. I believe you're muted, sir. If you can unmute and let me know if you can hear me.
Okay, we cannot hear Fabio.
No, we cannot. As they continue to work on the technology on the back end, sir, I will come back to you, Mr. Rossi, for a third question, and that is the UNOPS is the central entity of the United Nations system with a mandate to infrastructure. Can you provide examples of this new resilient infrastructure for us?
Con mucho gusto, y aprovecho para saludar al Dr. Tufton, con quienes nos hemos conocido en Jamaica en varias oportunidades. UNOPS desarrolla su cooperación de manera preventiva con motivo de la respuesta a la presencia de desastres. En América Latina y el Caribe tenemos una amplia experiencia en el diseño de infraestructura de transporte, agua y salud, con enfoque de resiliencia preventiva, pero también casos interesantes de respuesta a desastres. Así, por ejemplo, la totalidad de los puentes desarrollados en Costa Rica con diseños y dispositivos antisísmicos de última generación considerando escenarios de incrementos significativos en los niveles de precipitaciones con motivo del cambio climático. De igual manera, en Panamá, con el reciente diseño y construcción del hub humanitario, que permite contar con un centro logístico único destinado exclusivamente a la atención de emergencias y desastres a través de la acción conjunta de diseños bioclimáticos que utilizan refrigeración e iluminación natural junto a estrategias de soluciones basadas en la naturaleza para asegurar la protección del área y su sostenibilidad. En Haití, posterior al terremoto de 2011, corresponde destacar el proyecto conocido como 16-6, ejecutado conjuntamente con el Programa de Naciones Unidas para el Desarrollo, la Organización Internacional del Trabajo, la Organización Internacional para las Migraciones y UNOPS, donde fueron rehabilitados 16 vecindarios con viviendas e infraestructura resilientes. También en Dominica trabajamos junto a UNICEF para rehabilitar escuelas afectadas por huracanes, poniendo especial atención en los riesgos sísmicos relacionados con la estabilidad del suelo, las lluvias intensas y los riesgos de deslizamientos y la solidez para las nuevas edificaciones. Desde el punto de vista de la asistencia técnica, hemos trabajado de manera estratégica en Curazao y Santa Lucía para contribuir a brindar una planificación estratégica del desarrollo de infraestructura a todos los niveles. Y por último, estamos trabajando, ya que lo tenemos a don Fabio López tratando de conectarse, pero no quiero dejar de mencionarlo, estamos trabajando con los municipios de Cóbano, Lepanto y Paquera, en la región de Guanacaste, en Costa Rica, para contribuir al desarrollo de una solución integral en materia de gestión de residuos que permita atender las múltiples amenazas que plantea la conservación de las zonas marítimo-costeras. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rossi. And I appreciate you including some information from Costa Rica, as we haven't been able to hear as much as we would have liked from that region. I'm going to do one last sound check. Can you hear us, Mr. Lopez?
I think we've lost the connection.
Oh, I'm getting a thumbs up.
Okay. Here is he.
Are you able to speak so we can see if we can hear you?
Oh, what a pity.
It sounds like you can hear us, but we still cannot hear you. I'm terribly sorry. I'm going to, we have 2 minutes left, and I'd like to open it up. I know that we have not been able to hear from Mr. Lopez, and we have not heard as much from Dr. Tufton. And I'd like to ask all of our presenters, instead of our round 3 questions, is there anything that anyone would like to say in closing? If you can keep it to 30 seconds or less, any important points that you would like to leave with our participants today? Mr. Rossi?
Con mucho gusto. Tal vez hacer una reflexión sobre la participación. Lo había mencionado Liz en su presentación en el 6º principio sobre la importancia de la participación en que haya una efectiva apropiación de las soluciones resilientes. Hoy la planificación de infraestructura para un futuro resiliente y con bajas emisiones requiere repensar a todos los niveles para que nadie se quede atrás. Esa planificación debe ir de la mano de los esfuerzos del sector público y privado, tal vez en al menos 2 dimensiones. La primera tiene que ver con la necesidad de capacitar a la nueva generación. a la generación que va a ocupar los nuevos puestos en el futuro en materia de resiliencia, cambio climático y, por supuesto, infraestructura. En segundo lugar, y tal vez es el último aspecto que quiero destacar, lo que tiene que ver con las comunidades. Cuando hablamos de resiliencia, hablamos de temas complejos de entender. Es complejo entender el nivel de riesgo y es complejo de entender el nivel de la solución. Ambos aspectos deben ser debidamente explicados a las comunidades para asegurar que haya una auténtica apropiación y un apoyo por parte de las personas más vulnerables. De lo contrario, seguiremos viendo una gran resistencia, un gran temor y una gran preocupación frente a lo desconocido. Por lo tanto, es importante poner en la primera línea de acción una adecuada interacción, adecuada información y adecuada participación con todos los sectores realmente involucrados. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rossi. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but I would like to extend my sincere appreciation to you, Mr. Rossi, Ms. Varga, Dr. Tufton, and Mr. Lopez for your participation and sharing your expertise with us today. We appreciate your time, and I do hope that all of the participants have had a very beneficial hour with us. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you
Bye.
for sharing. Thank you.